Good morning, everybody. My name is Kaylin Riswold. I am President and CEO of the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce, and thank you for joining us here today. We are recording this session so that we can have this live on our website and kind of explain to people what Leadership Insitute is all about. And I am so excited to reimagine this program and bring it back. So Leadership Insitute is a program the Chamber used to have, and we are bringing it back together with some absolute fantastic minds at the table. Part of the new impact statement of the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce is we are your advocate and your resource for our community. I believe Leadership Insitute really doubles down on that. Not only are we your resource for leadership development, but we're taking care of our community and we are empowering all of you to continue to be leaders and develop the skills that you need to lead our community and those people you interact with. So without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to Rick Lochner and Tish Thompson, who will be heading up Leadership Insitute. Truly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for putting together all of the topics and how this is going to work. It's something I'm personally really excited about. So I think this is going to be fantastic, not just for the Chamber, but for our community. And this is where we are leaders in this space. And thank you all for joining us to hear a little bit more about this. And I look forward to seeing you in January and beyond.
Cool. Thanks, Kaylin. And Tish and I, and along with Gina and Holly are pretty excited. I mean, Tish and I were involved in the previous iteration. And so when we saw the fact that leadership development was now part of the Chamber's pillars, we were super excited to get back engaged and offer something that, you know, as I look across the screen, I even see a few alumni from the previous iteration. So it's nice to see that interest is still there. So I'm going to share the screen here real quick. And get, I presume everybody can see this. Okay, awesome. So the Leadership Insitute is, as Kaylin said, it's a reimagining of the previous iteration. While the previous iteration was very successful in the way it was set up for the time, we did have a lot of learnings from it, and we learned how that should we get the opportunity to do this again, that we would make some adjustments and improvements. So that's what we baked into this newest iteration. And of course, the first thing is it's now a year-long program as opposed to the previous iteration that was condensed into what was essentially a January through April program. It will still include many of the things that people found valuable, as we'll explain as we go through this, but it is now a year-long program. And of course, the way we've set it up is that it's also progressive. And by virtue of the fact that we've extended it over 12 months, it allows us to really look at how do we develop leaders in the truest sense. And it really starts with how do we lead ourselves? And so as you'll see towards the end of this conversation, you'll see that what we've put together to help you be a better leader of self. And then we know that once we lead us effectively, that it's really the success of any leader is built on the relationships. Not a week goes by, but I read more material and content that talks about the importance of relationships, because I'm sure, as most of us on this call know, it's our relationships that carry us through some of the challenging times that we've all navigated over the last 9 months. And then, of course, leadership is a team sport. And so the idea that we migrate from leading self through the relationships that we build as leaders now to how do we lead the teams and business units and components of our organization. So we talk about organizational leadership. So let's look at what we're really talking about here when we talk about leadership development. So I thought it was important to include this definition in the slide of identifying it as the process of improving one's leadership skills, knowledge, and attitudes but in the context of the leadership roles that they have in the organization. So we talk about leadership training, and training is, you know, the skills and some of the knowledge, but it really doesn't take hold until you apply it in the context of the role that you have. And that's why we're excited to bring this to bear, because this is what true leadership development is. It helps build on much of the information that we get through other chamber programs, and really bring it to a deeper level where we can now embed it into a knowledge base and an attitudinal base, so that we can lead, or as I like to characterize it, so that we can be leaders instead of doing leadership. So with that, we've set up today's program to be experiential and to be able to experience the kinds of things that you'll go through in each of the sessions through all 12 months of the program. So I'm going to turn it over to Tish, who will take us through the self and the relationship part of the experience, and then I'll come back later and we'll wrap it up with any Q&A and questions, and try to answer as many questions as you have about the program itself once you hear what Tish and I have to deliver as far as how we've set it up. So with that, Tish.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So happy to be here with you guys. I'm excited to be able to co-facilitate this upcoming year's Leadership Insitute with Rick, Gina, and Holly, and the reimagined version of it. We're so elated to be able to provide this offering in partnership with the Chamber. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And in the meantime, while I'm pulling up my screen, what you will see is a file in the chat. That's your participant guide. So if you want to just go ahead and pull that up, we will be using that during our time together. So you can go ahead and download that. It is a PDF. And yell at me if you can see my slides. You'll have to yell at me. Okay. Let me do duplicate. All right, so where are we going? What we wanted to kind of do a introduction related to was taking the concept of emotional intelligence. If we talk about really developing the self, having strong emotional intelligence is something that is critically important as leaders. And I'm sure many of you have heard of, experienced, and have deep knowledge of emotional intelligence. So today we just want to drop a couple of nuggets and provide kind of a refresher related to it. So I first wanted to start off with how emotional intelligence is defined. So it's defined as capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions judiciously and empathetically. And that's a definition that's offered to us by Talent Smart. So if I had to break it down in a very succinct way, it's about being aware of ourselves. And once we're aware, how do we manage it? It's also being aware of others and how they're responding. And then once we see that, how are we managing that? So before we dig deeper into the context of the 4 elements of emotional intelligence, we wanted you to take a quick assessment that we've provided for you in your handout. So we're going to give you maybe about 6 minutes-ish. So if you could take a minute, it starts on page 2 of your handout. As you're completing this, what we want you to think about is your shoes off self, not who you hope to be or who you want to be, but rather who you are and how you show up. So we're going to give you a couple minutes to fill that out. It starts on page 2 and it goes to page 3, and then there's a tally where you can kind of get a sense of where you fall. And this will give you some context as we talk about the different elements. So we're going to have at it. We'll pull you back in about 6 minutes, but in the meantime, we're going to give you a little mood music as you're completing the assessment. All right, let's come back together. Hopefully you had enough time to complete that. I wanted to make sure that you complete the assessment first before we provided the deeper definitions, because sometimes we try to answer them based on what we think it should be. So now we're going to dive into the different elements of what emotional intelligence is. And there are 4 elements. Now, in some models that you will see a 5th. But traditionally, this is the standard model for emotional intelligence. Again, like I stated previously, it's broken out into 4 segments. So if you could take those top 2 blocks of circles and crunch those together, and then the bottom 2, those 2 go together. So I'll give you an example. So self-awareness, knowing your strengths and weaknesses and how they impact others. And then self-management is then, once you know that to be the case, how do you control it as an individual? So for me, if I could be real personal and real with you guys this morning, and vulnerable. So with me, I recognize that when I'm having conversations with my children, that one of my areas that I am being mindful of is when there's something that we don't agree about. And in that moment, what I do is I will just throw out a litany of different questions, tons of different questions, one after the other, like rapid fire. And so I'm aware of that. And I'm also aware of how it might impact how they receive that. And so there are times where, okay, I'm gonna be honest, where I don't care how they feel about it. I'm just gonna do what I do. That's not the healthy way to go about it. And then there are times where I think about what's more important. Is it me as mom being right? Or is it me fostering a relationship where my children know that they can have an open and honest conversation with me? And that's when you start to think about how you show up for people. That is a very important question you have to ask yourself. It's one thing to say, well, this is just how I am. It's another thing to say, this is how I am, and I recognize how it gives life to a situation, and I also recognize how it does not give life to a situation. So being aware of how you show up is critically important. That's the first step. Then the decision is self-management. What will I do with it? So now that I'm aware that when I'm in a heated conversation with my children, and one of my tendencies is to ask rapid questions, and my intent is to be right, that is not the most effective way to show up. And so what I do to manage that is I close my mouth and I let them share their perspective. That's how I control the mood. That is my self-management. It has taken me years to develop that behavior, because as a mom, it's like, okay, I said what I said and it is what it is. But it's so important that we recognize how we come across to other people. And you think about the bigger goal. The bigger goal is to have strong relationships in our lives, whether it be personal or professional or in the office. So that's self-awareness and self-management. Now let's jump to social awareness and relationship management. So social awareness is about being able to be in tune with other people's emotions, being in tune with how they might be reacting to a situation. So being in tune to it. Relationship management is then, what am I going to do about it to create a better experience for that person or that group of people? So I'll give you an example. So let's say in your business, either you're the owner of that business or you're a leader within an organization. And let's say you're having a team meeting. And in the team meeting, you are noticing that people are starting to shut down. You notice that the hands are crossing, people are coming away from the table. You see eyes rolling. So we're aware of what's happening in the situation. Now, there are some people who will see all of that happening. They're aware. They see it happening. There are others who might be low on social awareness who don't see any of that happening. The importance of being in tune to what's happening in our social environment is so that we then know what to do to get the conversation, get the situation back on track. So if we notice that people are shutting down, not engaging, there's something happening in the room that shifted. Relationship management now comes in of, well, what are we going to do with it? So when we see that shift happening, the whole thing around building strong EQ relationship management is, yes, I see this. What am I going to pull out of my EQ toolkit related to relationship management in order to manage the dynamics that's happening in my meeting, or to manage the dynamics that's happening in this one-on-one conversation that I'm having with the client? And that's what emotional intelligence helps us to do. So I'm curious to hear from you guys. Let's say you were in that situation where you are now aware socially that the meeting is shutting down and people in it are no longer engaged. What are some tips that you can think of to get the conversation back on track to kind of restore that safety? You can unmute yourselves and shout out what you would do, or use the chat box to share some perspective. I'm okay with silence, so anybody can hop in. What would you do to get the conversation back on track?
Tish, this is Gina. I find it's helpful to just call it as you see it, and to say to the group, well, you know, I'm sensing some discomfort, or I'm sensing some disagreement here. Let's talk about it. And to do it in a way that feels safe, not to call it out in an accusatory way, but just to surface what the mood of the meeting or the mood of that room has become, and invite people to talk about it. The second thing that I think can be useful is engaging with somebody specifically. So if there's somebody in the room that you have a good relationship with, that's an ally of yours and you are to them, asking them directly and saying, Tish, would you be willing to share what's on your mind right now? Because I'm sensing from the room that whatever, that the mood has shifted a bit. And sometimes just getting that one person to engage will allow other people to feel comfortable engaging as well. And then you can move towards some resolution.
Yeah. That's a really great point, Gina. And DJ stated the same thing in the chat. Acknowledge it is going off the rails, and tell everyone to stand up and stretch. I love that. To stand up and kind of get the blood flowing to help people to loosen up. But I think it is important to acknowledge it. If we have low social awareness, so if you look at your results and you notice that you might have low social awareness, meaning things are happening around you and sometimes you don't catch it quickly, it's really beginning to be attuned to, one of the concepts I love for this is called learn to look. And learn to look is all about being in tune to the room and just watching the dynamics that's happening. Sometimes we get so focused on the goal of whatever it is we're trying to achieve, we miss things that are happening around us. But if we want to achieve that goal, we have to be in tune what's happening within our environment, whether it's one-on-one with individuals or in a group setting. So those are the four dynamics. Self, and when we break down self, it's am I aware of me? And once I'm aware of me, what do I do about it? Second block, social. Am I aware of what's happening in the social settings around me, whether that's in one-on-one meetings, group settings? And then once I'm aware, what do I do about it? Some of us are strong on all four. Some of us are stronger in a couple. Some of us might be stronger in the awareness, but what to do with it may not be so strong. And so that's why it's so important to know when you take this assessment, where are some of your strengths and where might be some of your blind spots. So before we move on, I want to pause to see if there are any questions related to the four elements of emotional intelligence. All right, so here's an example of what happens. So I'm sure many of you have heard of the amygdala. So our emotions happen there first. So emotions happen and we react very quickly. Before that situation can get to our prefrontal lobe, we're already reacting to it. And so what we want to begin to do is control how that amygdala responds and have more control over then how do we show up for people when we see a certain situation. So the emotional brain responds to an event way more quickly than our thinking brain does. And so being able to flex your emotional intelligence muscle helps us to keep ourselves out of trouble. So when a situation happens, not allowing our emotions to dictate what we do next, but really taking a pause and taking a step back to say, okay, Yep, that car just cut me off on the highway. Instead of me providing a few choice words and a few choice fingers, I am going to take a breath and allow myself to calm down and let it go. So those are the kinds of things that we want to control, is not to allow the emotions to dictate our behavior, because it gets us in trouble and it happens just that quickly. So why is it important? I think we all get why it's so important in order to be able to have strong EQ. First is it helps to manage our stress, particularly when we are in high stress situations. We're in close proximity with people and our nerves are shot. And so it's really important to figure out, how do I begin to manage that stress, whether it's working out, whether it's meditating, whatever the case might be, whatever that is for you. Looking at things from a glass half full perspective. Looking at things from a perspective of, yes, this sucks right now, but how can I make the best out of it? What opportunities do I have in this moment? And that really helps to build our mental well-being as well. Conflict resolution. Having strong EQ really helps us to resolve conflict much more effectively. If we are someone who kind of just go off the handle, our ability to resolve conflict is going to be a challenge. But if we're able to understand what our tendencies are, count to 10, be curious about a situation, understand how our behavior is impacting others, then we're far more effective at resolving conflict. And we actually have an entire session in Leadership Insitute that talks specifically about resolving conflict. So these are all the reasons why we want to stay focused on it. And for leadership perspective, it helps us to have great work satisfaction and the people we're leading to have great work satisfaction. So on your chart, your participant guide, there is a section that says which EQ is your strength, and which one do you potentially see as an area of improvement. So I'm going to give you like 30 seconds to just check the box for the emotional intelligence element that you're strongest. And if you have, two that are tied for the highest score, check both of those. That's really important and something to celebrate. And if you have some that are in the needs area of improvement, check those boxes as well. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to check those boxes. And then on your own time, we want you to go back and kind of reflect on those questions that says, what behaviors and actions do you exhibit that indicate that this is a strength? That's really important. We can say it's a strength, but what behaviors and actions do you exhibit that tell you, what's the evidence that tell you it's a strength? And same for the areas of improvement. What evidence do you have that indicates that it might be a gap for you? So having that self-epiphany is really important. So as you completed that assessment, what are some of your thoughts on your results? And you can unmute yourselves and share. What are some of your thoughts of what you saw in your self-assessment that you completed? I'm going to see you guys. What are some of your thoughts?
Not very surprising.
What'd you say?
Not very surprising.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody else?
Tish, I'll say there's sometimes a conflict that comes out. I was looking at the social awareness. Like at first thought, I would have said that, like, yeah, I think I rank probably the highest in social awareness, but comparative to the others, that's the one where I had some points missing, some more points missing. And it was around the example that you gave. Sometimes when I'm in my leadership voice, I feel like I need to exercise being an authority over a situation. It could be with kids' team or whatever. I can get so locked in on where we need to go that I lose some of the grip of understanding where they are right now. And that example you gave was perfect, going into question mode and then just to add another funny component to what you said, sometimes I'll tell myself, okay, you gotta be quiet, but then my eyes will start looking like this, and then so then I create a whole other problem with my demeanor. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's sometimes it's a conflict when you're looking to exercise Leadership, you know, you want to balance the empathy and all that, but it's like, but we got to get here. I'm trying to guide you there, but also have to be connected to you with where you are. And sometimes that's a struggle.
And certainly we want to achieve the goal. That's why we're in leadership. That's why we run business, because we have somewhere we're going. We have something we want to achieve. We will never forget about that. However, what we want to be mindful of is what might get in the way of that. And what might get in the way of that is if people aren't tracking with me. That might be one thing that get in the way of it. And so you want to just be mindful to make sure people are tracking with you. And sometimes people's faces are blank, and we don't know what to do with that. So what we do with that, some of the comments we saw in the chat, call that out. You know, I just shared something with you guys, and I noticed your faces just went completely blank. I am big on just calling it what it is in the center of the room and helping people to kind of process through that. But you're right. We full speed ahead, and we miss all of this that's happening. In the chat, DJ says stronger on awareness, not so strong on the management piece. Yeah. And I'll share with you guys a book that is really helpful, and it gives a ton of different ideas on what you can do to start to flex your EQ muscle in whatever of the 4 areas you want to focus on. So let me go back. So I'm going to break you out into some breakout rooms, because I've shared with you the 4 different elements. And I think it's important that we start to see, what does EQ look like in action? So there is a case study on this screen. You don't have to remember what it says, because I included it in your handout. It's Dave. And so what I want you to do in your breakout group is read the case. And I want you to indicate first, is he demonstrating high emotional intelligence or low emotional intelligence? And then the next thing I want you to do is indicate which of the 4 boxes seems to be most evident in this case. There might be small glimpses of all 4 in here, but which one seems to show up the most? So I'm going to give you about 4 minutes-ish in your group, so that time is going to go fast. So I'm going to send you out. Let me get you into your breakout rooms. Oh, where am I?
Tish, do you want me to go ahead and put people in breakout rooms?
Yeah, I'm not seeing that as an option on my side.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you. You're hanging out with me in the main room? Oh, he just went. Okay.
Just let me know when you want me to close those rooms.
Perfect. Okay. Probably in another 3 minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, we can now pull them back. I think it'll give them the 1 minute.
Yep. Okay, cool.
Thank you. Oh, I had one over here. Looks like we're back. Welcome back.
Yep.
So talk to me. So when we think about Dave, was he high on emotional intelligence or low?
Low.
Generally. Yeah, low. So in conversations with your group, which EQ element stood out the most in terms of where he was low? What'd you guys come out with?
Self-management.
Self-management, yeah.
Self-management was one that came out. What's another one that could be coming out pretty heavy?
Relationship management.
Yep, the relationship management piece. And so he has an opportunity there to really, one, be more aware of what behaviors he chooses when someone sets him off or when someone disappoints him, or if he has a perception that he doesn't trust someone. Him understanding that about himself is really important, so that then he knows what to do when he's faced with that situation. It's not good enough to say, you know what, I'm gonna treat you this way until you earn my trust. Well, by that point, the relationship is ruined because people aren't gonna wanna be bothered with him, period. And so the relationship management piece is really low, and how he manages himself is low. Is it possible, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is it possible to have relationship management, but be low on social awareness? Is that possible? Is it possible to be able to manage the situation, but you may not have been aware of it when it happened?
Yes.
Yeah. And I get that question a lot in sessions. They're like, well, how can you have relationship management if you don't have social awareness? It looks like this. Oh, that's what happens. You step it, the situation happened. By that point, you're trying to fix it already, but it has already happened. You missed it while it was happening, but you're starting to kind of see how people are reacting, and you try to go back and recover it. So yes, it is possible to be strong at managing relationship, but just not be aware of things as it's happening in the moment. What questions might I be able to answer before I pass it on to my amazing co-host, Rick? Thoughts, questions, epiphanies? Cool, so I'm gonna toss it over to Rick.
Cool.
Share the leadership side.
Okay, are we good? We can see the screen? All right, awesome. So what you've experienced is, we talked about a little bit about self, we talked a little bit about relationships, and that essentially just gives you a microcosm of how we build this over a 12-month period, and also gives you an idea of how interactive each session will be, where we start off with some basic concepts, and then we get into a little bit more interaction with each other through the breakout rooms, and then we get into a a higher level application within the context of your work. So here we talk about organizational leadership as we get into that level of understanding, in the sense that it is a team sport. You know, there can be no leadership without followership or without followers. It's a question I ask leaders all the time. If you have no followers, then can you really call yourself a leader? And of course, they're going to say, you know, no, not really. If nobody's following, then you're not leading. And which leads to then what I find to be a very insightful follow-on question is then why do they follow you? And so it's really around that, and that takes us back to, if you're going to lead a team, then the reason they're going to follow you has a lot to do with what Tish just talked about. So the ultimate measure of a leader is how effective they are in creating that sustainable success through others. It's the ultimate test of leadership. You know, if you're doing it all yourself, then you're really not leading. You're managing maybe at best. But the ultimate test is how well do you not only create success through others, but then ultimately create other leaders. And those are the things we talk about and focus on at the organizational level. So staying with the theme of today, leading with empathy is obviously a critical element to that. Several of the conversations talked about trust. I'm sure that came up as a point of conversation. And we'll talk more about that as we lead through the program in 2021. The trust necessary for sustainable success, because it's all about, development is all about sustainable success. Anybody can be a one-hit wonder. That's not what we're here to create. We're here to create sustainable, successful, and effective leaders. So let's talk about then putting it in practice. How do we apply it? So based on what you've learned today, reflect on a key relationship at work. Okay, so now we're bringing it into the context of your work. It could be a manager, it could be a peer, team member, whatever. How has your emotional intelligence impacted that relationship, either positively or negatively? I mean, we can look at a relationship that's just thriving, and you can learn from that, or you can look at a relationship that maybe needs reparation, and you can learn from that and what adjustments you need to make. So, and then provide your insights to your facilitator no later than 12/16. So we're not asking you to do that in the context of today's session, but what it does highlight is there will be field work in every session that will drive and reinforce the accountability to application back to whoever facilitated that particular session 2 weeks after the session is facilitated. So that kind of puts it all together in a 45-minute time frame of what you can expect, the kind of experience you can expect in each of these sessions. So let's jump into a little bit of logistics. So every monthly session is 3 hours long, from 9 to 12 on the given date of that session. And we'll begin, as we did today, with some basic concepts that lead, and then that will lead into, think of the first hour as kind of getting to know the concept. The second hour, in a very general sense, let's have some conversation in breakout rooms in twos or threes of what that means to us personally. And then in that third hour could be, case studies or guest speakers or some sort of application that really takes it into the real world from its basic concept to real world application. As I said earlier, every session will have field work with that accountability, because it's really about how you apply it that turns it into a development exercise versus a mere training exercise. One of the statistics I use is, if you're exposed to one idea one time, you'll forget 98% of it in 16 days. That's not what we're here to do. So, however, if you're exposed to an idea 5 times in 5 days, in other words, you reinforce it, you'll remember north of 60% of it for the rest of your life, according to the American Psychology Association. So obviously, when you're looking at the ROI on your investment in this program, obviously the application is going to give you that ROI. And then, of course, for those that sign up for the full year right out of the gate, Tish and I have agreed to provide some coaching sessions through the year that will help reinforce that development process. We have found that in the previous iteration of the Leadership Institute, it was the coaching process that was many times was the value add, the long pole in the tent, if you will, that really helped reinforce what they learned in each of the sessions. So now let's take a look at what each session will dive into. The program starts on the 5th of January next year and starts off with self-awareness, and we begin the journey with the DISC Plus assessment, which is a combination of the DISC assessment and the values index. The DISC looks at your behavioral styles and patterns, and your values index looks at what motivates you. Again, both based on science, and both because we start off with this level of self-awareness, much like we did today with the EQ assessment. These are validated, industry validated assessments that not only will give you a sense of who you are today, but we will use the results as you go through the program. So for instance, one of the things that the DISC will tell you is your communication style. And as you get into the session in May, when Tish will facilitate a session on effective communication, she will bring in, okay, well, what do the DISC results say about your style, and how does that help you or hinder you from being an effective leader? Then we get into ethics and values and explore the personal values and ethics that guide your leadership. And then we move from that value set to attitudes and behaviors, because as you look at the continuum, what we believe we think and what we think we do, and what we do is what drives the desired results. If you want to back into different results, you have to do differently. And if in order to do differently, you have to think differently. And so that's where we get into the conversation in March about the power of attitude. And with that, really look at this idea of how do those attitudes affect the way we lead, the way we are, the way we think about inclusion, the way we think about what leadership really is, the way we think about equity and diversity. And so all of those will come into the conversation in a very real world sense. The first 3 sessions I will facilitate. The 4th session in April on goal planning and time management will be facilitated by Tish. And it concludes the session around self-leadership, around how do you manage your time, and what is your goal planning process. So, you know, as I like to say, we don't have time management issues, we have priority management issues. So this combination of goals and the way we manage our time, you'll walk out of that session in April with a good sense of how do you do that. So that's self-leadership. Then we move into relationships. And so in May, as I mentioned earlier, we'll talk about communications and effective communications. Arguably the #1 issue in business today is effective communications or lack thereof. Tish also mentioned that she'll be doing a session in June on managing conflict. You know, it's interesting that the connection between effective communications and how we manage conflict. So conflict will certainly be a key topic that Tish will also facilitate. And then we jump into building trust and credibility. Again, empathy and EQ are part of that, but Holly McDonald will take a deeper dive into building trust and credibility. That's her area of expertise. So she brings a great deal of experience into how do we build that trust, true trust, into the leadership relationships. And then in August, to wrap up the relationship piece, Gina McClowry will facilitate a session on problem solving and critical thinking. You know, we live in a information-rich, knowledge-poor world. So this ability to critically think as leaders and cut through the information overload and think critically about the decisions that we make is going to be a key element of this particular conversation. And last but not least, we get into the organizational piece. Building teams and teamwork. Again, Tish will facilitate this session on, what does it really mean to lead a team? And then as we talk about organizational leadership, we have to include a session on business acumen, which I will lead on, how it's one thing to lead people, but it's leading people to what end? And so this idea of business acumen and how you run your business, and then winding it down in November with a session on process and performance management. That 94% of the issues, according to the Drucker Foundation, 94% of problems in organizations are process related, not people related. And so we often forget that fact, that poor processes will ruin good people. And so we have to have a session on what part of that leadership mantra is about how we deliver and manage the performance of the organization, which is very much both people-driven and process-driven. And then in December, we essentially have a graduation, a capstone, if you will, because we're going to ask each of you to identify, early on in the program, we're going to ask each of you to identify a leadership issue or a challenge that you have in your organization. And so in December, we're going to ask you to present your solution to that challenge, and how the different topics throughout the year have helped you organize your solution around that. And so we cap it off with some presentations, graduation, and a challenge to continue the leadership journey as is appropriate for what makes sense for your success. So with that, we have a link. The link is here in the presentation as far as where to register. At least at this point, it's still on the same page as as where you registered for this particular conversation. And then as soon as you register, you'll receive an email to complete the DISC Plus assessment. And then that will, between the time that you register and the 5th of January, which will set us up with your information on getting started on your leadership journey. So with that, we wanted to leave a couple of minutes here with for any questions and yeah buts that you have about the program. What are your questions?
How much is the program?
It is $1,200, I believe, for those that sign up for the entire program. Because at that point, if you sign up for the entire program, that we throw in the assessment for free, basically.
So it's 3 hours. Do you have a set date, the actual day that it's going to be, or is that going to float and change?
No, we actually have exact dates set for all 12 sessions.
Okay.
Those are all listed on the event calendar as well.
Think of it as, I think for planning purposes, it's, I think for almost all of them, it's the first Tuesday of every month.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the only exception is July because it butts up to the 4th. So it's going to be that first Thursday in July.
So we've set the program up, as far as to be as flexible as possible. Obviously, you get the maximum value out of attending all 12 sessions. But if there's a particular session there that you find, and let's just use managing conflict, because in my experience, and I'm pretty sure from Tish's, that's a common theme that people just struggle with. And so maybe you just want to step into that class and go through that particular session because you're feeling good about all the rest of your leadership abilities. But that one, that's just a blind spot for you. So you want to step into that class. You can do that too. Or maybe you just want to take the chunks. Maybe you're comfortable with your self-leadership and your relations, and you want to dive into the topics around organizational leadership and just that block. You're certainly welcome to do that as well. it's priced and structured to be as flexible as possible, but still fall within that development model that we've created.
You had mentioned that you were going to have guest speakers. So how are these presented? So I think it's Tish, you, Holly, and Gina.
Yeah, Gina.
And then are there
Raise your
other business leaders? Like how can you
Well,
talk
for
to
instance, I can just speak for myself. So as I look at the ethics and values portion, we are blessed to have here in Naperville, we have a very talented and speaker on values in John Bloomberg. I don't know if anybody's heard of him or read his book Return on Integrity, but he's presented to the previous iteration of the Leadership Insitute. So my thought is I would bring John in onto the call in that third hour and have him share his experience as somebody who does a deep dive and focuses on, I mean, he's spoken all over the world about the importance of values and integrity. And so I think that would enhance the experience, assuming his availability, of course, but that would be an example, Anita, of, you know, where we might bring in guest speakers to. It's really up to each of the individual facilitators, but I just use that as an example of how that might dovetail into a particular session.
Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Rick and Tish, so much for putting this all together, and Holly and Gina. We're super excited to kick things off next month. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. We can go ahead and get those answered. But yeah, please check out the event calendar and go ahead and get registered.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
We'll see you
Well
in
done.
January.
Thank you.
See you in January.
Take care.